Venezuela. The debacle in this Latin American country seems to be going on forever and a day. And far from getting better, the situation only seems to get worse and worse and worse. Venezuelan GDP fell by around 35% in 2019. And yes, I did say 35%. In the last 6 years alone, the country has lost 2/3 of its wealth. In other words, we are talking about a rapid decline that has virtually no historical precedent in the world, especially given that this is not a country that is technically at war. And my friends, as we have already told you in previous videos, one of the great reasons for this shocking failure of the Bolivarian political and economic system has to do with its very high dependence on oil. Because for years, when crude oil was selling for more than $100 a barrel, Hugo Chavez and his acolytes were able to indulge themselves in all kinds of wasteful spending. They scared away and punished private investment, and despite this, even went around with their heads held high, boasting of their great prosperity. However, since then, things have changed a lot and have gotten much worse. And now, in 2020, the coronavirus crisis has been the last straw for the Venezuelan oil industry. That, as we will see, has been treading water for years. Just take a look at this one fact. A barrel of Venezuelan oil sold for $9.90 in April 2020, and that's a long way down from the nearly $57 average per barrel in 2019. And let's look closer, because this isn't even the worst of it. Check out this chart that shows us how Venezuelan oil production has evolved over the past 10 years. So you see, my friends, despite having the largest oil reserves in the world today, the Bolivarian policy disaster has been of such magnitude that Venezuela today produces about 6 times less oil than it did just 6 years ago. By 2020, crude oil revenues will be more than 95% less than they were just 6 years ago. And don't forget for a moment that we are talking about an economy that developed with basically a rentier model. The Bolivarian government never used the immense resources it gained for the sale of oil to develop or diversify its economy. They didn't even invest in the very industry that was their golden goose. It might be hard to believe, but the truth is that oil production began to fall just when prices were soaring. And we are not only talking about oil extraction, but also its refining. That is, the process by which crude oil is transformed into fuels in order to be used. And here, the numbers are no better. In fact, the truth is that they are much, much worse. Over the past 2 decades, Venezuela's refinement capacity has only fallen further. The lack of investment, maintenance, and the practice of replacing professionals with thousands of friends without specialized competence or training has caused Venezuelan refineries to have suffered a lot of accidents, breakdowns, and fires in recent years that have gradually reduced Venezuela's refining capacity to basically zero. In fact, 2020 began with news like this.
PDVSA shuts its last 2 operating refineries in Venezuela, Amuay, Cardone.
That's right, you heard that correctly. One of the major players in the oil industry sector has been forced to close its complexes. This includes the crown jewel, the Amuay refinery, the basis of what became one of the 3 largest oil refining complexes on the planet. And no, don't think this is a move to fight climate change or anything positive like that. Fires, breakdowns, electricity costs, and even a lack of oil are what have finally forced the Venezuelan government to shut down. And that's what explains why, in a country that literally floats on oil, we come across news stories like this one.
Iranian petrol tanker arrives in Venezuela in defiance of US Financial Times.
So the question is, now what? That is, what is the Bolivarian government going to do now if it is no longer able to extract and refine the minimum quantity of oil that the Venezuelan economy needs in order to function? How are they going to maintain their revolution now? Where are they going to get the resources they need to keep on bribing all the high-ranking officers in the army and government so they remain loyal? Well, it's right here where the last card from Nicolas Maduro's government comes into play. Venezuela has a region known as the Orinoco Mining Arch that could count as one of the largest deposits of mineral riches in the world. According to Venezuelan government data, this region could hold 7,000 tons of gold, which, by the way, would make it the 2nd largest reserve in the world. Millions of tons of kimberlite and diamonds, iron, bauxite, and another 40 high-value minerals, including coltan, which is currently one of the most prized minerals in the electronics industry. If these figures are real, which does not seem far-fetched, and Venezuela managed to exploit its potential on a regular basis, the country could raise billions of dollars each year. Dollars that could, of course, also be used to revive the oil industry, the precarious national electricity system, improve water treatment and distribution, or be used to fund plans to industrialize and develop the Venezuelan economy. In other words, when the time comes, the Orinoco Mining Arch could play a key role in Venezuela's recovery. But hold on just one moment, because we have stumbled upon one inconvenient truth. And so what is it? Well, these mining regions are anything but quiet and peaceful areas for doing business. In fact, they're pretty much the opposite. So my friends, do you want to know more about this wild story? If so, let's get cracking.
The Gold Rush.
If there's one thing that characterizes the Venezuelan government, it's that they wipe everything out. Everything. Absolutely anything that implies a potential source of wealth, they steal it or expropriate it.
Planta Guarena, expropiese. Planta Lara, expropiese. Planta de Electrosoldado Valencia, expropiese.
And the mining sector was not going to be treated any differently. Now, what is the metal that the Chavista government is most interested in today? As I'm sure many of you have already guessed, it's gold. Not only is gold scarce, but it's one of the few minerals, in fact practically the only one, that has a high value as soon as it is extracted. That is, even without being processed. In fact, native gold, which is what unrefined gold is called, has so much value that it is more sought after than a lollipop on the playground. And that is precisely why the Venezuelan government back in Chavez's time made the control of its production, distribution and sale one of its main objectives. A target that led Chavez to expropriate a lot of concessions held by private mining companies between 2008 and 2011, especially Canadian ones. Something that, by the way, caused the Venezuelan government to be convicted by an international arbitration tribunal. Of course, in Caracas, that's almost like getting a Purple Heart or a military merit medal. Or if you don't know anything about the military, imagine someone turns up at a party at 2 a.m. with a whole bunch of new booze. But, you know, it's the fight against imperialism. So, let me ask you a question. What do you think was the result in terms of production? Well, not surprisingly, gold production plummeted by 80% in just 3 years. Exactly what you might have expected. The Bolivaran government has the uncanny ability to destroy everything it touches. But let's just take a moment before we pass judgment, because things have changed somewhat in recent years, not least because the Maduro government knows that gold is one of the last few cards it has to play in order to cling to power. Or, should I say, continue looting the country with impunity. In recent years, the Maduro government has signed agreements with new mining companies, mainly Russian and Chinese ones, and in 2015 they approved Decree 2165, allowing the reinstatement of private companies in the sector. However, companies can only operate through a joint venture with the state, and always on the condition that at least 55% of that company is under the control of the Venezuelan government. In this way, the state wants to continue to control production whilst benefiting from the experience of mining companies, at least those that are daring to enter such a risky venture. What's more, as recently as April 2020, the exploitation of gold mines in river areas was legalized. Up until that point, this was prohibited actively because it implies very high environmental damage. But Maduro, he now needs gold by any means possible, and as much as possible. On paper, it might not sound so strange, but look closer, because here there is a slight problem. Most mineral holdings, and particularly gold, are illegal and are in the hands of criminal groups and traffickers who, in many cases, are not exactly like the government. It is believed that there are around 2,000 mines of this type operating, and this is not insignificant. The illegal mining currently carried out by non-government groups represents a good chunk of the gold production in the country, if not the majority of it. These mines, controlled by criminal groups and clans, have turned Bolivar State, which is where the Orinoco Mining Arch is located, into a region that is now practically at war. Groups such as that belonging to Jean Valdez, aka El Toto, have become one of the government's greatest enemies by succeeding in bringing the army, the ELN or the National Liberation Army and former FARC guerrillas to their knees. Yeah, that's right, the ELN and the ex-FARC forces as well. These guerrilla groups that were once purely Colombian have now become criminal gangs of Colombian Venezuelan traffickers with whom the Chavista government openly collaborates. To give you an idea, it is estimated that of all the proceeds from illicit activities obtained by the ELN, 60% comes from illegal mining in Venezuela. And yes, also in Colombia. And this is something we will get into in a few moments, because the truth is that there is a lot, and I mean a lot, going on here. But first of all, we're going to review how gold production works in Venezuela and what role the central bank plays in this whole story. As we will see, the Venezuelan law states that all gold production must be delivered to the Central Bank of Venezuela, which manages the gold reserves and the exports of the extracted gold to be traded. In addition, in order to export this mineral, the operation needs to be approved by the National Assembly, a legal requirement that the Chavista government has ignored since the Venezuelan parliament fell into the hands of the opposition. But by far the biggest problem is that, due to the gigantic smuggling and illegal mining networks that may take gold out of Venezuela, mainly through Brazil and Guyana, it is estimated that only 1 out of every 3 or 4 tons extracted are delivered to the Venezuelan central bank. So, in effect, the government has already lost control over most of the gold trade, and of course, of that income. And that is why the Chavista government of Nicolas Maduro has declared war on illegal mining. They don't want to end it, but essentially to restore their power and take over that activity. Or, in other words, the idea is not to solve the problem, but to replace the key players. This is when the ugliest part of the story appears. Mining states, especially Bolivar states, have descended into a kind of violent anarchy, where government criminals and smuggling criminals kill each other for control. It's a terrible scenario that is causing savage killings like the ones we were used to watching on television or in Hollywood films. The victims of these killings are miners from both sides, collaborators, carriers, and of course, all kinds of mercenaries and ringleaders. So, do you want to come with us to this place to find out more about what's going on and to see how the balance is shifting? Of course you do. So, let's get started.
Bloody gold.
As we mentioned, the Venezuelan government and the ELN guerrillas and ex-FARC forces have generated a curious criminal symbiosis to take back control of the Orinoco gold. And if the presence of these criminal groups already casts a dark shadow, imagine if we add to the mix a corrupt military, or more specifically, very corrupt top officers. The military, instead of working to ensure that gold and its profits improve the country's economic situation, are dedicated to filling their own pockets and have no qualms about working and collaborating with criminal gangs. And it turns out, surprise, surprise, that's exactly what's going on. The methods the military uses to fill their pockets in this particular criminal ecosystem are known to be similar to those used by the ELN guerrillas and the ex-FARC forces. They collect a kind of toll in the form of gold, coltan, diamonds, or whatever is extracted. Something like an in-kind tax on the illegal groups that extract the ore. And, you know, if you aren't willing to jump through the hoop, then say goodbye, because they're after you, and then full-out war is just around the corner. But pay attention here, because don't think that these are the only players. Venezuela's state-owned mining company, Minervan, is also fully implicated in all of this murky history. We are talking about a company that is sanctioned by the United States for illegally enriching Maduro and the Chavista gang. It has gone from extracting gold itself to being a mere channel for illegal gold. These days, most of the gold that Minervan brings to the Central Bank of Venezuela to sell or take out of the country comes from the extractions made by criminal groups controlled by the government. That is to say, in Venezuela, the extraction of many minerals and above all else gold no longer depends on the government, concessions, or private companies, but simply on illegal groups. This is what the Bolivarian Revolution has converted Venezuela into. But, okay, let's not go off track. Let's get back to the gold that the Venezuelan government manages and that has become its last great source of income. The point is that due to international sanctions, the options that the Venezuelan government have to export their gold have also been considerably reduced. For example, before the sanctions, much of the native gold was sent to Switzerland for refining before being sold or deposited in the coffers of the central bank. But now, after the US sanctions, the Swiss have become suspicious of this activity and no longer accept gold from Venezuela. And as history buffs might know, it takes an awful lot for the Swiss to not accept gold. This is something that forced Venezuelan leaders to change their routes. Today, the gold that the Venezuelan government manages to export is sent to places like Turkey, Dubai, or Uganda? No, really, Uganda. Listen up.
73 tons of Venezuelan gold flew to Turkey, Dubai, and Uganda. Insight Crime.
In fact, according to information from Insight Crime, it is believed that the Venezuelan gold could be leaving the country on scheduled flights of Turkish Airlines, the largest Turkish airline flying between Turkey and Venezuela. Flights started in 2016 with 3 weekly services and were extended to 5 just 1 year later. Does that sound at all suspicious? So, what happens next? What happens once the gold arrives in Turkey? Well, it appears that many of the refined gold bars later end up well protected in Iran, which is a loyal ally of the Venezuelan regime, or they're deposited to banks in Singapore. Many of these operations, of course, are framed as sales to companies of dubious reputation and serve either to fill their own pockets or to pay for the supplies and suppliers that the Venezuelan government needs to stay in power. But, as we said before, it's not only Turkey that is used. Uganda has become another priority destination. Venezuelan gold is refined there by the African Gold Refinery, a company owned by the Belgian company Goetz Gold, which is based in Dubai. Turkey, Uganda, Dubai. What a racket. By the way, this Belgian company is suspected of being part of an international blood gold trafficking network, which is the term used for gold illegally extracted in war zones or for whose trade and control there are armed disputes between criminal gangs. I mean, come on! Just what is going on in the Orinoco Mining Arch? And the worst part is that of all these million-dollar transactions, regular Venezuelans see virtually nothing. Because sadly, most of the gold that leaves the country under the pretext of refining it never returns or even enters the central bank of Venezuela again. Neither in the form of gold bars nor in the form of cash deposits. It just disappears. So where could it possibly go? I'm pretty sure that you already know the answer to that though, don't you? What's more, don't forget that between 2/3 and 3/4, that is, most of all the gold production in the country, is not controlled by the government, or at least not through legitimate channels set by the law. So, in a nutshell, the corruption of the Chavista regime and the state's lack of control over the smugglers causes Venezuelans to lose hundreds of tons of gold, hundreds and hundreds, billions of dollars that are taken and mined with impunity from the country. A fortune that is not only impoverishing Venezuela, but is bathing the country in blood as well. And it's not just about the gold. It's a very similar story with the diamonds or the Venezuelan coltan. And, of course, let's not forget the government's other source of income, drug trafficking. But that's something we covered in this video. So my friends, the Bolivarian revolution has turned Venezuela into a great mafia state, to the point that now the Bolivarian government itself is on its knees, because it is no longer able to control those criminal groups operating within its own country. So now the question is, do you think that Venezuela will be able to take advantage of all these immense riches to finally get back on its feet? Is there any solution to institutionalized corruption and organized crime in the country? Could Venezuela have already reached the point of no return? As always, we ask the questions and leave it up to you to leave your answers. Stick them down in the comments below. Anyway, we really hope you enjoyed this video. Please hit like if you did, and don't forget to subscribe for brand new videos. If you hit the little alarm down there, you'll get updates whenever we release new ones. Don't forget to check out our friends at the Reconsider Media podcast too. They provided the vocals in this episode that were not my dulcet tones. Also, this channel is possible because of Patreon and our patrons on that platform. Please consider joining them and supporting our mission of providing independent political coverage. And, as always, I'll see you next time.
If you want to learn more about politics and world affairs and hear some more of my lovely voice, come check out the Reconsider podcast, where we don't do the thinking for you. Find Reconsider at www.reconsidermedia.com or on Apple or Google Play or your favorite podcatcher.